There was no silence in the cabin, even at night. The wind was like a wild song that pushed away the quiet. The power had gone off and on many times. We cooked up many things from the freezer to be heated in the fireplace later. "We can have a cat at home," said Flora. We stored the cooked food in coolers outside in the snow. Today, Flora cooked soup on the stove, stirring as she read a book. "This is you, Teddy," she called to me. When I walked over to the stove, I saw she was reading a book of Irish wolfhound dogs. A tall dog like me was on the cover. "You're much better looking, I must say," said Flora. If I could smile, I would have. "Did you know that your ancestors were warriors?" she said, peering over the book at me. "So Sylvan told me," I said. "Your great-grandfather or grandmother may have pulled soldiers off horses with their teeth," said Flora. "I myself have never done that," I said, making Nickel laugh. "It says here you have kindly disposition," said Flora. "Does it say he's a best friend?" asked Nickel, tossing more wood on the fire. Flora lowered the book and stirred the soup, tossing in some herbs from a small jar. "Yes," she announced, "it does. And often the Irish wolfhound loves children and cats." "I have met a cat or two that I liked," I said. "We have a cat at home," said Flora. "Is it a spitter?" I asked. Flora gave me an insulted look. "She is not a spitter." A sudden sweep of wind sent snow against the cabin. Outside, a limb fell. We all looked up. "This is lasting a long time," said Nickel. "The batteries for the weather box are getting low, and I don't know how to charge them. But the storm is expected to last for a few more days." "Good," said Flora. "I like it here." "I like it here too," said Nickel, as long as there's wood to burn and food to eat." He paused. "And as long as Mom and Dad aren't worried." "Remember, I wrote a note," said Flora. "There's no wood in the shed," I said. "There is wood in the shed," I said. "If we can get there," said Nickel. "And food in the pantry," said Flora. "I like it here too," I said suddenly. "I do." Sylvan types on his computer, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning, muttering to himself. I sit up on the red rug and yawn my yawn that ends with a squeak. He looks over at me. Being a writer is not easy, you know. It is now that I think of it, either full of sorrow or full of joy. "Like being a dog," I say. Sylvan turns in his chair and peers at me. I should take my own advice to Ellie and write about what I love. Sylvan pauses. "I will write about you." "The way Ellie wrote about her cat?" I ask. "Yes," says Sylvan. He turns back to his computer and writes furiously. "Ellie is a poet, you know," he says. At long last, the next time she sees you, she'll hear you speak." "I know," I say, yawning. The peal of laughter from Sylvan fills the room. After a moment, he laughs more at what he's writing. He coughs a bit at the same time. He has a bottle of medicine and a spoon on his desk. He pours some into the spoon. His cheeks are a little flushed. After a few minutes, he gets up, closes the cover to his computer, and lies down on the couch. The cough stays with him through the night. It's the beginning of Sylvan getting sick. Day 3 in the cabin during a horrific storm. Nickel read dramatically from his notebook. Flora is rummaging through the refrigerator like a hungry weasel, searching for something mysterious and possibly poisonous. Nickel wrote silently in his notebook every day and had just begun reading his views of our life in the cabin. His writing is funny, sly, and sometimes poignant. Sylvan had taught me the word poignant. It may be the most important in poetry, Sylvan tells me, poignancy. Sylvan would have said that Nickel had style. Not once had Nickel asked to use Sylvan's computer. The silver computer sat silently on his desk, cover closed. There was something final about that. Sylvan closes his laptop computer with a snap. The end. Dunno. The loud word dunno causes me to leap up from a sound sleep. Sylvan grins at me and brings a pillow over to my red rug. He lies next to me, one arm around me. Because I am a dog with a good nose and fine ears, I can hear that he is not breathing easily. He doesn't have the same Sylvan smell that I know. You should go to the vet, I tell him. The doctor, he corrects me. Yes. Ellie is driving me to the doctor tomorrow. You can have a nice talk with her. His grin is huge. Flora has become the cook, inventing meals that look terrible, but surprised us by tasting good. I lap up her soups noisily, the liquid first, then eating whatever she has added at the end. That's a much better way to eat soup than with a spoon, said Nickel. Peanut butter is very hard, I told him, trying to get it off the roof of my mouth. It's not because I'm a girl that I cook, Flora explained. I like it. It's in the herbs. Like science. When I grow up and have 27 cats and dogs and become a horse trainer, I will have a large collection of herbs. Nickel laughed, and the cheerful sound cutting through the constant noise of the wind outside. It reminded me of Sylvan's laugh. I will find a horse, you just watch, said Flora, turning on the oven. And she will, said Nickel. Nickel and I went outside to the shed while Flora cooked whatever invention she cooked. It was still hard to get through the wind and drifts. We both ran with our heads down. When we reached the shed, we opened the door and shut it behind us. The shed smelled the sweet smell of cut wood. It was strangely warm and quiet. Nickel leaned against the woodpile for a moment. This is where you slept after Sylvan left, he said, nodding at the pile of gray blankets behind the woodpile. Yes. You didn't want to sleep in the house alone. No. Were you warm enough? Most nights. Nickel sighed. But what will happen to you after Flora and I go home? I didn't answer. After a moment, Nickel started loading wood into the log carrier. Just before we opened the door to fight our way back to the cabinet, Nickel turned. Something good will happen. I know. After all, you once had Sylvan, he said. He said it with poignant tone. That word again. Poignant. When we were out in the snow and wind again, walking quickly, Nickel suddenly touched my head. Look. In the clearing close to the woods stood a deer, the color of dawn, watching us, a sign of something good. And Nickel, we hurried on, and when we both looked back, the deer was gone. I told them in the morning. I didn't want to tell them at night. Night could bring dreams. We were eating pancakes that Flora had made without milk, strange and grainy and wonderful, with lots of maple syrup. I licked the syrup off first, then ate the pancake in small bits. Nickel watched me and ate his pancake in the same way. It made Flora laugh. Nickel had found the cord to charge the weather box. More days of bad weather. Ice is possible before the storm ends. The roads will be cleared after 2 days. Things will open again. Electricity will be back on in most places. So, I said suddenly, Sylvan got very sick. I hadn't meant to say it right out like that. Nickel put down his fork. Flora opened her mouth, but for the first time since I'd known her, no words came out. You didn't think he'd just gone away and left me, did you? I asked. After all, I've told you about him. Flora shook her head, still silent. I could see tears at the edges of Nickel's eyes. That's the story, I said. He got sick. Ellie comes to drive Sylvan to the doctor. The day is sunny, and she walks into the house without knocking. Hello, Teddy, she says. She puts her head down next to mine and hugs me. Hello, Ellie, I say. She grins. I can hear you, she says happily. You're a poet, I say. Sylvan comes into the living room dressed in a tweed jacket over a blue shirt. His eyes are blue as the shirt. Did I hear you two talking? He asked slyly. Yes, says Ellie. I'm wondering if my dog, Billy, will talk to me when I get home. No, asks Sylvan, but don't worry. You'll have many hours to read to him. Ellie sighs. No, Billy is more of a sleeper, she says. I'll drive, says Sylvan, who, since I've known him, has only ridden a bike. Ellie is no fool. Do you have a driver's license? She asks. No, he's a poet, I say, making Ellie laugh. I'm driving, says Ellie. You can sit next to me and roll out your lovely words. Ellie strokes my head. Do you want to ride in the car with us? She asks me. I'll wait here, I say. I don't want to leave the house. I'm afraid that if I leave, somehow everything may change. I walk outside and watch them drive off in Ellie's small red car, going away. I hear Ellie's car drive up to the front door. Sylvan told me about the theater once. I feel like I'm watching a stage play. Sylvan comes in, looking tired. He takes off his tweed jacket and stretches out on the couch. Ellie carries a paper bag. The doctor's office made me sick, complains Sylvan. There must be an ocean of germs in there. That's why I don't like going to the doctor. You went there sick, says Ellie. She takes bottles of medicine out of the paper bag and sets them by the sink. She sits on a stool next to Sylvan. She wouldn't let me know what the doctor said, Ellie says to me. Or he wouldn't let me know what the doctor said, Ellie says to me. You are not my mother, says Sylvan, his arm covering his eyes. You are much more beautiful than my mother. Thank you, says Ellie. He has a fever, I say. Sylvan takes his arm away from his eyes and stares at me. How do you know that? I'm a dog. I smell the fever and I can hear chest rumbles in you. See, says Sylvan with more energy, I don't need a doctor. I have a dog. Take your pills and drink lots of water, says Ellie. I don't much like water, says Sylvan. Ellie laughs a lot. I'll be back tomorrow for the class if you're well enough to have it here, she says. Only if someone reads a real poem, says Sylvan. Curmudgeon, whispers Ellie as she kisses me on the top of my head. Rest, she calls as she goes out the door. Sylvan doesn't need rest. He smiles at me as he sits at the computer. I like that girl, he says, and I heard her call me a curmudgeon. He adds as he types. I guess there's nothing wrong with your ears, I say. Thank you, Dr. Dog, says Sylvan with sarcasm. And you took care of Sylvan, said Nickel. I did, like he took care of you, said Flora. Nickel's voice was soft, but I could hear him even with the storm outside. It's almost as if Sylvan saved you and brought you here so you could save us. Maybe. One night, late, Sylvan read me part of a poem he had read about me. He called it He, the Poet's Dog. I closed my eyes to remember it. He, the poet's dog, picks up my dropped words. He carries them in his soft mouth, like treasures to bury for later. So, he, the poet's dog, can pass them along and I can follow. Flora put her head on my back. All this time I've been mad that Sylvan left you, but maybe he didn't really leave you at all. At all, she repeated softly.